It's a routine flight until the moment everything changes. A woman minding her own business on a crowded plane suddenly finds herself facing an aggressive police officer. The officer claims she's causing a disturbance, and before she knows it, she's being arrested in front of dozens of passengers. But what happens next shocks everyone, especially the officer. With one simple sentence, the woman shuts down the entire situation, leaving the officer speechless and the passengers stunned. Who is this woman, and what is her connection to the officer's actions? As the tension rises and the crowd watches in disbelief, the truth begins to unravel, revealing a deeper story no one could have anticipated. Stay tuned to find out how one woman's courage turned an everyday flight into a life-changing moment. What happens next might just change everything. As the plane hums along, the woman who had been quietly reading couldn't understand why the officer had singled her out. She barely said a word to anyone. The officer's aggressive tone escalated, his accusations becoming more heated, and the passengers began whispering, unsure of what was unfolding. Some recorded the scene on their phones, while others exchanged nervous glances. What was it about her that made the officer act this way? But as she stood up, ready to face whatever was coming, the woman's calm demeanor never wavered. The officer, seemingly unable to let it go, continued pushing her, not realizing that this was no ordinary passenger. Little did he know, the woman had a background that would leave him, and everyone else, in total shock. What she was about to reveal would turn the situation on its head, making the officer regret every second of his actions. The officer's frustration was palpable, his hand gripping the cuffing device as he loomed closer. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, some staring at the unfolding scene while others tried to avert their eyes. The tension in the cabin was thick, almost suffocating. It felt like everyone knew something wasn't right, but no one dared speak up. Everyone was too afraid to get involved, except for one woman sitting near the back. She was watching closely, her expression unreadable, but her eyes followed every movement of the officer and the woman he was targeting. The officer, perhaps sensing the crowd's unease, raised his voice even louder. "You're going to be arrested for interfering with a police officer's duties," he barked. His words seemed rehearsed, like they were meant to intimidate. But the woman he was addressing didn't flinch. As the officer drew closer, the woman calmly looked him in the eyes and spoke just one sentence. But no one in the cabin moved. No one spoke. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the entire plane held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. What was this woman's story? Was she really who she said she was? And if so, why was she on this flight, with no one around to back her up? The officer's hand clenched around the radio, his eyes flickering toward the door to the cockpit. He had no idea who this woman was, or why she'd come for him today. But something in the way she spoke, so cool, so sure of herself, set his nerves on edge. There was something deeply unsettling about this encounter. And then, just when it seemed like the tension would break, the plane hit turbulence. The sudden jolt rocked everyone in their seats, and the sound of the seatbelt signs clicking on added to the chaos. But the officer didn't flinch. His focus was still locked on the woman, now watching him with a calm that only made the situation even more intense. As the turbulence rocked the plane, passengers gripped their armrests, their eyes darting around nervously. But the officer, still standing rigidly in front of the woman, barely seemed to notice. His focus was entirely on her, and the unease in the air had never been more palpable. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, the woman's phone rang. She glanced down at the screen, a brief flicker of something crossing her face, something unreadable, almost like a flash of recognition. Her expression didn't change, but the officer saw it, and for the first time, he hesitated. The woman picked up the call with a calm, controlled motion. "I'll be right there," she said into the phone, her voice smooth and steady, like she wasn't in the middle of a confrontation on a plane. The officer stiffened. Who was she talking to? What was happening? Before he could react, she hung up the phone and locked eyes with him again. "I suggest you sit down, Officer Stevens. Your entire department is about to find out what you've been hiding." The words hit harder than any punch. The officer blinked, his face draining of color. His grip tightened on the radio, his pulse racing as his mind scrambled to catch up. This was no longer just about an arrest. This was about something far bigger, something that threatened to ruin everything. The passengers watched in tense silence, the weight of the moment settling over the cabin. What was this woman hinting at? What secrets was she about to expose? And just as the officer opened his mouth to say something, anything, a voice crackled over the intercom, cutting through the tense silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The calm, professional tone of the— But just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, the woman looked down at the papers, then back at Stevens, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "You were never meant to be in this situation, Officer Stevens. I wasn't supposed to be here today either." The officer blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" The woman's smile deepened, and for the first time, her composure cracked just slightly. "Because I wasn't supposed to be an agent. I was supposed to be one of you." The final twist hit like a freight train. The woman wasn't just a lead investigator. She was an undercover agent who had infiltrated Stevens' own department years ago. All the while, she had been building a case against him. She had set everything up, meticulously watching him from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to expose him. Stevens' face twisted in disbelief, his mind racing as he pieced together the truth. The woman hadn't just been on this plane by chance. She had been playing him the whole time. And now it was too late to stop what was coming. The walls were closing in, and there was nowhere to run. The officer collapsed into a seat, his world crumbling around him. The woman didn't look at him with triumph. She looked at him with something colder, something far more final. Her job was done. She had everything she needed, and there was no going back. As the plane began its descent, the passengers slowly started to realize the gravity of what had just happened. Some exchanged glances, unsure whether to applaud or to turn away from the unsettling truth that had just been revealed. The woman had made her move, and with one final glance at the officer, she calmly turned away, preparing to leave him to face the consequences of his own actions. It was over, but the real story had only just begun. As the plane touched down, the reality of what had just happened began to settle in. Officer Stevens was left behind, his fate sealed, while the woman, who had once seemed like just another passenger, walked off the plane with her head held high. Her work was done, the evidence she'd gathered now in the hands of her superiors. The man who had once worn the uniform of justice was now about to face the very consequences he'd avoided for so long. The passengers, still processing what they had witnessed, quietly filed off the plane, their minds buzzing with the unbelievable turn of events. Most would never know the full story, but for those who had seen it firsthand, the lesson was clear. Appearances can be deceiving, and justice doesn't always look the way we expect. As the woman disappeared into the crowd, her mission complete, one thing was certain. The truth always finds a way to come out, no matter how hard you try to hide it.